encourage you to drop your introduce yourself in the chat for others to know who's in the room, name, organization, where in the county you reside and operate from. But thanks for taking the time. Buenos días. Los invito a que compartan su información en el chat, ofreciendo su nombre, su afiliación con la organización con la que trabajan y donde en el condado residen y hacen su trabajo. Buenos días. So Maria will be dropping in the chat as well an agenda packet. So keep an eye out for that. She'll be doing that for the next few minutes as people join. That's the updated packet that you all can take a look at and follow along with. But good to have you here. We're going to start off with the second item on the agenda. It is an action item, and this is an action item regarding the Small Business Diversity Network's request for representation on this collaborative with all of you. As was outlined in your agenda packet, the Small Business Diversity Network has submitted a formal request to have Pepper Russell as their representative on this collaborative. You may recognize the name Pepper Russell. Pepper has been serving alongside of you since the beginning of this initiative, representing the Greater Irvine Chamber. The Chamber, however, has decided that they want to not continue their participation in the initiative, but Pepper, wanting to continue to serve on this collaborative and do this work with you all, has asked if she could simply swap her affiliation and who she's representing on the collaborative. And given the Small Business Diversity Network's mission, staff thought that it was appropriate to bring it to your consideration for comments and brief discussion here today at this meeting to take an action on that request. Before we move into consideration, I'd like to give and comments from all of you. I'd like to invite Pepper, who I think I did see here on the screen. Pepper, give you 30 seconds to introduce the Small Business Diversity Network, its mission, its the work that it does in the region, and then maybe open the floor for any questions or comments people may have. So Pepper, let me turn to you for a brief moment.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I am asking to represent the Small Business Diversity Network. We are a 2-year-old organization and have almost 1,500 members in that time that have joined us that are businesses throughout Orange County. Some of them are representatives of the Small Business Diversity Network are on this call. Quite a few of you that are working with chambers, international chambers, and some businesses as well. What we do is we target small and medium-sized businesses to help them grow. We provide them resources and information on where they can get funding, how they can collaborate. Our last year's ProCon and this year's last year's Recon and this year's ProCon were very well attended, and some of you were there, and we look forward to seeing you at many more meetings and events that we'll be having. We now have a new office space over at Park Place, so we hope that you will join us anytime you need information about SBDN. Please feel free to reach out to me. I am on their leadership advisory board and working closely with the executive team. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Pepper, for that background. Let me open up the floor for a moment here for questions and comments from the collaborative. I see, Jeff, you have your hand up. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you, Ish. And Pepper, good to see you. I just wanted the group to be aware that SBDN is one of our partners on our Economic Development Coalition, and we absolutely support their inclusion in this group through Pepper's representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Other comments or questions from the collaborative?
Ishmael, I just have one quick question.
Go ahead, Linda.
Hi, Pepper. Good to see you. Happy New Year. The only question is just for the benefit of everyone, because of this, with a new organization coming aboard at this time, are there any implications for, you know, for what has been the coalition moving from the past moving forward? Are there any implications that we ought to know about?
Linda, no, this is somewhat, I would say, of an exception. I think, you guys have put in so much work over 2 years to bring someone in, midstream is difficult, and we've tried to avoid that. The reason is Pepper has been involved, so there's not a learning curve at all. She's just representing a different org but the org still represents the mission. I think so. This is an exception. This is not going to happen unless there needs to, yeah, I would say that unless there's a lot of drop off because people don't see themselves and we have to kind of reestablish a critical mass. This is an exception because of Pepper's longstanding work with this.
Absolutely. Was there a reason why they weren't in the original HRTC?
Yeah, because we had to continue to balance all the different stakeholder groups, particularly at the beginning of it when it was SURF, and we did not want to overpopulate what would have been the business category. Right. So that's the reason why we had who we had in each category to the best that we could.
They had also just been established at the time we were putting all this together.
Thank you, Linda, for your question. Other questions or comments from the collaborative? And again, for those of you who are joining, we're in the middle of the second item of our agenda, which is an action item to consider allowing Pepper Russell to represent the Small Business Diversity Network and that organization's inclusion in this collaborative. Pepper is simply, she's been with the collaborative since day one, simply just changing her affiliation here to continue working alongside of all of you. As the Irvine Chamber has opted not to continue participation, she wants to maintain continuity here with a new affiliation. Other questions or comments from the collaborative? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up or anything in the chat. Maria, Jesse, I don't know if you see anything. I'm not seeing comments or questions regarding this agenda item. So with that, I will open the floor and call for a motion in a second to approve this request.
April Barnes from VitalLink. I move to approve Pepper Russell's addition with the Small Business Diversity Network.
And I'll second it.
Thank you, April. Thank you, Linda. Actually, I do see one quick question. Let me just touch on that before we open the floor for vote. The question was from Jasmine, just asking why the Irvine Chamber is deciding not to continue.
Yeah, I answered in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Very good. So, so to approve the request at this moment, I'm going to ask for you to either, this is for the yes vote. So if you approve this motion at this moment, please raise your hand or type yes in the chat. And so we'll give it a couple moments for those votes to come in. You can raise your hand. Some of you are opting for the thumbs up emoji. Thank you for that. The chat's being populated with yeses, so thank you. Okay, I'll give that a few more moments. Okay, with that, I will ask if any of you would like to vote no. Please type no in the chat, or there isn't a thumbs down emoji, so I guess you can do thumbs up for the no's if there's any no's. So give that a moment. Not seeing any. Any abstentions? If anybody would like to abstain from the vote, you can simply put abstain in the chat or give your thumbs up emoji at this moment. Okay, not seeing any of those either. I think the motion carries unanimously with this action item. So congratulations, Pepper. You will continue with the group.
Thank you all. I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Well, now we will move on to the third item on our agenda. This is a discussion item, and we will discuss the notice for funding opportunity, what we are referring to here as the NOFO, and do a review of the NOFO. This is an essential part of your efforts to align with the state's economic priorities and ensure equitable allocation of resources. So this is an important discussion. thank you to those of you who have participated in the two Catalyst NOFO draft surveys that were issued by staff. These were released in an effort to receive feedback from you and input that was submitted over the last few weeks to inform this process and this discussion today. So here to give us an update on where the NOFO process is, I'm going to turn it out to Jesse to walk us through that brief presentation. So Jesse, let me turn the floor to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ish. Everyone, so you have the full draft NOFO as it sits, but I think just like any NOFO, I try to make it as short and as easy as possible in my opinion. But even then, I think it's close to about 20 pages. But I want to get to probably the meat and potatoes of it. Some of it is basic compliance stuff, explaining things, and that's great. So if I want to maximize our time here to get one last round of input, both verbally and then follow up in writing, this is what I'm trying to condense it down to. Ultimately, kind of the funding breakdown. We're going to do 3 million available for round 1, and then we're going to do the same for round 2 and 3 that will get going kind of each quarter of this year, or definitely try to get it out by all 3 by the end of the year. We are going to split it up. I had to try to balance a lot of interest, in particular the direction where the state is clearly headed, which is what we discussed at the last meeting, versus honoring all the work you put in the development of the regional plan part 2. And I even got some comments from certain collaborative members about, how do we balance just focusing on job creation versus some of these other things that, impact our community and enhance our community. So I'm coming with a 75-25 split of we are heading in the direction more or less of where the state is going with the 2.25 million. But also though, we aren't going all the way in the sense that, the state will most likely just be focused on the accelerate and vet, and we'll bring that chart up a little bit later, but we discussed it at the last meeting. I still want to honor all the sector priorities that all of you selected through this process. So if you saw in the NOFO, the 2.25 million is focused on all of those 10 that you selected to be the top priorities for Orange County. And then 750,000 will be everything that kind of falls into the regional plan part 2 that isn't specifically about job creation, but is still important to maybe not economic equity, but equity, and also really impacts the quality of life. So again, I had to balance the shift that the state made. We are in Orange County going to go that way. I think it'd be irresponsible not to go that way. We did not advocate for those changes, but if the state goes that way, we're going to lean into it. So that's kind of how we have in this structure here. This is the scoring criteria that I put out. Try to keep it as simple as possible. Again, project impact at 30 points, equity being foundational to this work. So I put economic equity when you think about the good jobs category, equity because there may not be a major jobs component in the $750,000. It still has to be a benefit to those disinvested communities that we showed the census tracts at the very beginning. It's on our website. It's on that hub site. You can look to see what those census tracts are. There has been more of an inclusion of Justice 40 census tracts. So we have that as a census tract of note. Essentially though, where is the impact on those census tracts? Then 20% on the work plan. Have you thought it through? And I think given some of the feedback about, let's not disadvantage the little guy, right? Because some orgs can be very, very small and may not have the same capacity or qualifications. That's why, I think you still have to have it, that there is some experience here, but that's why that's much lower at 10 points and 10 points. So at the end of the day, when we put this in, given some of the responses on the survey, given what people have emailed me or contacted me about, what's the impact? I think that was a common theme, but also where's the equity? And so that's why we put it, 60 points of this whole thing are just in those 2 categories. The selection process, once we get all the applications in, we'll put it in a shared folder for all of you, but we will reasonably anonymize them. We will try to pull names and at least the individuals if they put their names on there, definitely the org name, but we also have to know who's doing it and their missions. That is to say, like if someone says that we're the union that represents electrical workers, I think we know that's IBEW. We can't redact that, but we will try to redact what we can in order to make sure this is as unbiased as a process as possible. So we will go through that process so you can see all applications. We will then triage them by the job creating or community enhancing. You'll be able to see all of them, but it's just good to know which ones are which. We'll also triage by kind of where it is in the project pipeline. So if you saw in the NOFO, there was a concept, which is like very early. I have an idea. maybe I've spent some time figuring it out, but it's really, really early stage. Accelerate is you've already moved on it, and how do we move it faster? And then as the status of the last mile, right? They have 1 or 2 last things and then they're implementation ready. Again, a focus on Catalyst is these are not implementation ready projects. Even in the survey that we did to the community or like to the region on some of those things, I'm telling you, a lot of those were already implementation ready. So some people kind of missed that part. So I want to reemphasize it here. With these, there's no funding guarantees because as with the survey, really only 2 things got the majority. So of all of you, 16 people completed that survey where we asked about ceilings and floors and some of those other concepts. Only really 2 things got a majority or more vote, and that was to do it in 3 rounds. And that was to make sure that there was priority, there was disbursement or diversification of the priority projects. Everything else was pretty much, I would say flat, but distributed in the sense that people had different answers. So of the 16 people that did it, 4 people thought one thing, 4 people thought another, and 4 people thought something else. So that wasn't enough for me to make sure I was including that feedback in. I included the feedback where there was a majority or majority plus of you in those responses. We will do this. The triaging is primarily so we can do apples to apples. Again, when you make some of your selections, will not have to say, we want to have one of each. If you individually want to make that decision, you're more than welcome to do that. But you still want to be able to compare projects that are in the same stages for you to be able to say, yes, I think this one's stronger than the other. So it's only done for apples to apples comparisons. There is no mandate that there should be funding in all 3 buckets. The selection process. So on the community enhancing project, I'm trying to honor what I thought we were going to enter into when we all started this process, and that is the collaborative. All of you will be reviewing and scoring all projects based on the criteria, and you will kind of decide what gets funded until all funds are exhausted. So, I think we can work out the details exactly on the voting mechanisms, but hypothetically, if the top vote getter needs $750,000, then that's the project we fund. No other projects will get funded. If the top vote getters are asking for $250,000, then we'll fund those 3 projects. Everything beneath that will not get funded. We will have an optional in person, and we'll confirm with CV or the fiscal agent EDD that we can compensate you for that. I remember that was kind of a comment. There's a lot of pre-work to some of these meetings. So much as they'll allow us, we want to compensate you that $100 to spend the time to come in, take your time to review and even discuss how you're feeling. Talk to some of your fellow collaborative members about what you feel like is a strong project. We'll then open up an online poll to vote on projects. And then at the next meeting, sorry, it shouldn't be in person. Sorry, on March 28th, when we have our next collaborative meeting, we'll kind of look at those results, and then you guys can kind of see if that reflects, what you decided, or because there's only $750,000, that some projects should only get partially funded to expand the number of projects getting funded, or whether you're comfortable with the results as is. If we need to massage out a little bit more, we can have a second poll to kind of confirm those things, but then the decisions would be much more narrow. The point is that we're trying to go through a diligent process where you can discuss with your fellow collaborative members in what you want to select. Now, as we move to the job creating projects, the regional convener and some of the consultants we have with the sector investment coordinators, assuming those sector investment coordinators the sector investors would not be able to analyze if they choose to apply for funding. But we will propose a list of projects to the collaborative for funding prior to the March 28th meeting. So you'll have that. We'll say, here are our decisions. Here's what we think we should be funded with the $2.25 million. The collaborative will have the opportunity to affirm those choices or recommend alternatives and say, I have experience with this. This isn't adequately addressing something similar that failed. Or again, given everyone has diverse perspectives, we welcome that input and want to collaborate with you on and consult with you on those decisions. Then the regional convener will kind of take that back and decide if we need to make any modifications to that original list for us to then work on the awarding process. So that's how we want to proceed. This is the timeline. We will most likely get the NOFO out at the end of this month. We'd love your comments either on this call or of course via email, or I can happy to set up a call by the end of day Tuesday for us to see what we want to incorporate and then go ahead and then release this thing. We will have proposers webinars one specifically for the job creating projects, another one specifically for the community enhancing projects. We want applications due by mid-March. You know, Marie and I can go through the process of sorting and anonymizing. We want you to meet the week of the 17th in March. OCBC will go ahead and send you the list of the job creation projects we will recommend by 3/21 to give you a week to digest and provide us comments on our meeting on the 28th. And then we'll, after you've had a chance to meet in person, we will launch a kind of a ballot, a survey, a poll, whatever language you want to use, in order to get a sense of what projects you felt would be the most impactful for the $750,000. And then we'd like to, at the March meeting, be able to ratify, finalize that selection so we can begin notifying people of their award. And of course, Charitable Ventures can begin the contracting process so they can begin the work. So with that, are there any questions?
All right, let's open up the floor for questions.
Yeah, and also, of course, there was the broader document. I wanted to probably just like present on what is probably most critical to a NOFO, but of course, there were other things. If people saw things that they want to question or comment about, you're more than welcome to do that also.
Jesse, could you put the calendar back up?
Sure. Sorry.
Thank you.
We do have Linda, unless you have a comment or question, I'm going to turn to Gary. He's got his hand up, and then we have Josefa and then Tony. Anything you want to add, Linda?
No, thank you.
Okay, Gary, let's turn to you.
Sure. I just have a observation more than anything, but Jesse, great job. I think you've done a great job putting this thing together. My only question comes with the timeline. I've done this stuff for decades, and it just seems like you're condensing a lot of things in the month of March. You're of the collaborative review, of collaborative input, of having meetings, and actually coming up with some recommendations all in 1 month. It just seems highly condensed to, and it will work if you're only expecting a handful of applications. But if you're having, 10, 15 applications or more, you just may want to open that up a little bit. I don't know what your considerations are for having to have something done by the end of March, other than it would be helpful. Thank you.
I think that's great feedback, Gary. I think maybe some of that I think we always have discretion here that's in the NOFO, in the sense that to that point, let's see how many applications we get. I did also say, we don't want these applications to be more than 10 pages. I hope that helps a little bit in the review. Well, I wanted to make it easy for the applicant. I don't like NOFOs that, they have to be like 50 to 100 pages. It's considering who we want to apply here. Hopefully that helps a little bit. But that said, if you look at it and the feedback is there's no way we can review this in a short amount of time, then we have the opportunity to push this back. We will just have to then turn over to the next round a little bit faster, because again, we really want to make sure that people are awarded so they have, and this is probably more for the last round, those people probably need 6 to 9 months to be able to execute what they're awarded on. So that's the only thing for consideration on our end about moving it quickly. We may have to have some overlap then between awarding the first round and launching the second. But let's see what we get. I hear you. Let's see what we get. And then if it's feedback that it would be overwhelming to do in such a short amount of time, we have the discretion to push back the awarding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Josefa.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Sorry I'm off camera. I'm not feeling great today, but I had a question and then a comment. I believe when I was reviewing the NOFO, there was a separate body and a process for community enhancement projects for evaluation versus job creating projects. And I was just wondering what's behind that, the logic, and what the evaluation looks like for job creating projects. So that's the question. And the comment is, I just want us to be mindful, when we talk about equity, I think we're also talking about size of organizations, right? Bigger is not always better, but bigger tends to have a shinier numbers. And so I just want to be mindful of quality versus quantity and how we can sort of incorporate that into the evaluation. Because as you mentioned, smaller organizations tend to go deeper versus broader. And that means maybe less like touch numbers, but more intensive work. So for instance, someone attending a workshop or an event versus someone getting deep coaching and assistance and technical assistance. So just wondering your thoughts on how we can be mindful and incorporate that essence into the process.
Yeah, so I'll just the second one I think is a point, Josefa, as you get to deliberation on the projects themselves. I think that's a great point to be reiterated. I think again, as I kind of said, part of it was, we didn't put a premium. If anything, it's this really like the smallest category or point amount is in, organizational capacity. So that way, like so smaller groups weren't already disadvantaged because they don't have the sprawling team or some sort of national brand. So I tried my best to accommodate for that in that sense. But I think the point of, again, what is equity versus the depth versus breadth is a question I think you should have with the community enhancement projects when you have that conversation. And maybe we'll probably open up a way where there's a dialogue channel, even offline, in order for you to kind of make those cases for everybody. So that's all I'm saying on the equity. And I think, right, different definitions of equity. I think that's something that should be made when the collaborative is deciding on the community enhancement projects. To your first point, it's primarily a shift in how not only where the state is going, but this whole process in general. And so I think originally when we embarked upon this, the understanding was that the collaborative was going to be the primary decision-making body. It's going to be mostly true when it comes to the implementation, from what I've been told, in the sense that, the collaborative will be the ones providing the letters of support in order for a project to even move on to the state. So the state is still honoring it in that sense. But on the other side of things, as they move to the industry cluster development, it's pretty clear that the regional convener is responsible for the success of this initiative now. And before it was the collaborative. Maintaining the collaborative is a very important part of this work, but the regional convener is responsible for the deployment of these funds, to direct the sector investment coordinators to move on the activation plan. And to be honest, the activation plan is the accountability tool for the state to come back to the regional convener and say what's happening with the money that you spent. So that's the reason why it's separated. So say like OCBC owns a lot more of this. And so therefore we have, to be honest, like have more decision-making authority in this process. That being said, we should and will consult and collaborate with the collaborative. Hence, the construction of the development, or the development of this NOFO there was a survey out, what themes would you want to see in that? And I made sure that was the case. People were responding anecdotally for those things. And same thing, we will submit to you what we think is best, but we absolutely want to hear where we could have blind spots. To your point of maybe equity could be one of those, and say, this is actually the stronger process. We'll take that feedback into consideration and try to make our decisions. So this was, again, us maybe honoring the old as we should, because you guys have put almost 2 years into this and we couldn't turn our backs on that, while recognizing the state's priorities or the state's requirements upon the regional convener and the general direction the state is going and how they want to fund these things.
Jesse, I just thank you for clarifying that. I think that's pretty significant, and I don't think we should just walk by that, because it's almost sort of a shift in power, right? I believe that this was built so that the people have the say, but it's not, from the optics of this is that OCBC has the power. And I understand with a large group and the priorities from the state, you have to do what you have to do. And I support this shift. I just think that we've got to be clear about some balance so that the community and this group does have that checks and balance in place. So the power isn't fully with OCBC. Or maybe that's what is intended. But thanks for sharing. I'll leave it there. I think that's significant, and appreciate you explaining the logic.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. It's, again, back to we will come with the whole point is like we are still coming. One is we receive proactive input before the development. We get the input, and then before we award, we will get your input. I understand. I mean, at the end of the day, like I think OCBC is allowed now by the state to make the executive decision. When it came to the development of the regional plan part 1 and part 2, that language was not so clear. So it was us facilitating. And I chafed every time Ish said, thank you, OCBC, for leading this, because that's not what we were doing, right? We were bringing you together. When themes emerged, we put those in the plans, and it was just a lot more of the collaborative input. Here, because the state is now says we are in the phase of getting something done, OCBC in some ways is kind of the executive there. In no way are we trying to cut you out of the process. Anyone in the process, we are, anytime anyone wants to call myself or Maria, email us, give us your thoughts and input. They always get responded to. But at the end of the day, they do instill us now to be more of an executive and have to move this thing forward. But I recognize the shift because not only did they shift the priorities, but they shifted in the ways things have to get done. The means are different. I understand that.
Just a couple of, and I'm going to turn to you, Tony, in here in a second, but there's a couple questions in the chat, maybe associated with this part of the discussion. One from Ana Ursua asking if there's any material or communications that can be shared regarding this new direction or authority. And then the second question from Ursula is asking that if one is a voting member on the collaborative, can you submit an application under this NOFO? Do you have to recuse yourself when considering those projects?
Yeah, so to Anna, we can send you as most writing as we have on that front. A lot of that has been verbal in our community of practice with the state directly, but there is language about consultation and collaboration with the collaborative, and I feel like we are adequately doing that. But as was in the first phase, it was what the collaborative wanted got done. But we will share that along, right? So I think we were always flexible to the themes and what the priorities of any member on the collaborative were. Ursula, in the sense that, yeah, like this is, you won't be able to vote on the project you submit, right? And we'll know that as staff on the back end. And so, you know, we can make that clear in writing, but doing so after we see the results would nullify your vote, right? It would essentially, we would disregard your ballot, and that would also impact some of the other projects you might have voted for. That's going to be the mechanism, but it says that we will ask who is voting. We know what your projects are. And so if you were to vote for yours, then you would be disqualifying yourself. Your whole vote would be thrown out. That being said, you can definitely vote for any other project.
And I'll just quickly just add that in the chat. Maria just mentioned that on page 25 of the NOFO packet, you can find the conflict of interest statement for a little bit more detail. That's referenced as attachment B. So, okay, let's turn to Tony next. Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you. Really two issues. I wanted to just share something that I didn't recognize what the state was saying until after we got to the second phase. But I don't know if, I'm not saying I agree with this, but this is also what I'm hearing. In the first grant, it was a planning grant, and therefore they wanted to hear what community and stakeholders said. And that got voted on so that people said, yes, that is what I said. And of course, that can still be changed. It's a living document. In the second grant, which is completely distinct, the state is saying, I'm not saying I agree, but they're saying is we don't want a bunch of new ideas. That would be dishonest to the first one. And therefore, we're in delivery stage. And therefore, the entity that has the grant has a duty to deliver what was said in the first one. And that's why you see the shift. That's an interpretation that I've heard. I only share it. I'm not speaking that I think that that's the best answer, but that's, and there is a document that the state had, and I think Jesse shared it previously, but anyway, so I just wanted to get that perspective. I'm wondering on this NOFO packet, could we get a single document that talked about the technical assistance, like a flyer, so that we'd be able to, you know, have that very specifically, obviously in whatever languages that we need to have it. And then I wanted to offer, it looks like you're doing webinars, but you're not doing office hours. Is that correct? And I wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, so, but the webinar would be, I mean, there's still, the webinar would just mean like, we will go over the high level stuff and kind of talk about all the work that preceded this little bit, and then it would convert into office hours where people are asking whatever questions they want. So there, there's going to be ample time for Q&A from anyone who attends in that sense. It's just
Okay,
gonna be a
well,
little bit more
I would include,
presentation.
because, well, sometimes it might be good to just be able to drop in and ask a specific question.
Yeah.
The other model, two models I've seen in other regions that might be useful here. One of them is a traditional FAQ, which is based on questions that are submitted by a certain time. So that you release the NOFO, and then you say, if you have questions that you'd like a written response to, please get those in within the first week. And so anyways, I think that's worked. And then the other thing they did in Los Angeles, which I first thought was not a good idea, but now I see that it probably was. They did a general webinar prior to the release of the actual NOFO that explained what is California Jobs First, what is the regional plan, that kind of was a conceptualization of what we're doing. And then that's a recording that people that were applying later would be able to use. So I want to throw those out as two ideas.
Yeah.
And then plus the single document that has all the TA that's related.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Anna, to your point, so the community enhancement project will be all the collaborative members casting their vote. And then, we'll show which ones were the top vote getters, and then you guys can review to confirm that this is how you want to spend the 750. The other one will be OCBC presenting you kind of a list, and of course you'll be able to access all of the applicants. And then it's for the collaborative to say, I think that you missed it because there's this project missed the cut, and I think it's really impactful for these reasons, and I have an experience in this. Or you think this project is good, but it's like we've been involved in projects like this and they fail for these reasons and they haven't adequately addressed those reasons. That would be the distinction.
Oh, you have a question from Linda. Go ahead, Linda. And then we have Luis.
Thank you. I'm going to send up a little bit of a red flare here. I understand the comments that are made by Tony and Josefa and Anna, and the some of the particulars that they're referencing. I do think, however, we're in the home stretch here. Our state is under great stress because of the wildfires and the implications that will have for our overall budget. We're also, I don't think it's any big surprise, in the crosshairs of the new federal administration. I think there are a lot of things that we need to be aware of, that it is in our best interest, for all the work that we've invested in this, for all the distance that we've covered, and for all that we've agreed upon and aligned with, that we move this forward expeditiously. I think that's really critical right now. I don't think further outreach, that's why I'm agreeing with that timeline. When I saw that timeline, I was going, yes, okay, everybody's understanding this. We're now at that point where it takes on a new intensity. I do think we need to take those external variables into consideration and make the decision as a group that we're going to move this along and stay with that timeline, and have confidence in the communities that we've served and the information that they've given us to make good decisions moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. And then did I miss another hand that was up?
My hand was up.
Luis, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I just have a few comments on the NOFO. One is related to that, the way that funds were separated. And thank you, Jesse. You kind of addressed, the reasoning behind, the prioritization, the 2.25 allocation towards projects that are, considered job creator projects, and then the 750 smaller pot for community enhancement projects. We were able to do a review with some of our community members that had been attending forums and stuff. And just one thing that came up from one of the community members was like, they saw a lot of the concerns that they had brought forward in that community enhancement, like, for example, housing you know, it's something that came up in a lot of for a lot of folks, you know, kind of across the board, in this smaller pot of funding. And so I understand the reasoning around, you know, following suit from what the direction that's coming from the state. At the same time, I would invite us to kind of you know, hold our ground a little bit. I don't know if I do agree with the idea of moving forward in a timely manner, you know, considering all of these different contextual things that we're dealing with. However, I would say, you know, would the group be open to shifting that allocation, you know, to create a little bit of a larger pool for the community enhancement projects? That's just a you know, a suggestion for the group. And another proposed change is that the you know, earlier on in the NOFO, there's in both for both the community enhancement and the job creation projects, there is language that says, you know, in the kind of more general description, you know, that projects have to show that they are benefiting disinvested communities, which again is one of the, you know, the large underlying values of the initiative. However, in the point system, that's only, as far as I can tell, it's only reflected in the economic equity category for 30 points. And in order to make it really have the weight that I think that it's supposed to have, you know, it's like I said, it's mentioned earlier on in the proposal. I'm wondering if we could also include the benefit to disinvested communities in the project impact category. That way it would be, you know, across both of those point categories, and have a heavier weight altogether to make sure that the projects that we're selecting are benefiting disinvested communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Luis, can you maybe send me like what that would like kind of in the NOFO, what you think that language would look like in it, and then also look at the application to see how how you might recommend cross-cutting that. I mean, I think the end of the day was I wanted to make sure that equity was at least tied for the most important, or you have to have equity and impact. You know, I mean, because you know, you could be doing a lot for, you know, a heavily disinvested community, but if you're only helping like, let's say 5 people versus, you know, potentially helping 100 people and they're all disinvested. So you have to balance, like, obviously that number is greater, but you know, who is of the greatest need and how much money you want to spend hypothetically per individual and the supports provided to them. Those are all things, I mean, I'm trying to balance. The point is, like, if you could give some recommendation on how to cross-cut that, I was just trying to look at it as impact, and then in the equity piece, are those people from disinvested communities? So like your impact is 100 people, your impact is 200 people, whatever the case may be, your impact could be a whole neighborhood. But then is that neighborhood the right neighborhood? Is that the right census tract? That's what I tried to do there. But again, and then on the equity side, you know, if it were an environmental project, let's say by its primary purpose, that would still have to show where the disinvested community members or the neighborhood or the census tract is being benefited. So if that's not clear, I think then that's fair for me to try to make that more clear. I just said, so when you look at the job creating, you know, we have to call that more economic equity because it's job creating in the process. While if you have a more, again, environmental or housing or whatever the case may be in that is just equity in the sense of, is it in the disinvested community or are the people benefiting from disinvested communities? But if you have a way to kind of, you know, lift some portion into that, I'd love to look at how that would look like in writing on the NOFO and in the application. I welcome that.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right, well,
Okay.
two questions came in the chat before I saw Anna's hand go up, so let me try to get to those first. Question from Ursula related.
Yeah, they cannot when it comes to Catalyst. They will have the final state implementation, which has yet to been released, but not in what we're discussing today. Creating a larger.
And then clarifying the larger pool.
Is that more for Luis? Taryn? Is that correct? Okay, she said yes. So
Okay, that was a question for Luis about clarifying what is meant by larger pool. Okay, well, you can,
yeah, Luis, can you jump in the chat and maybe
and maybe answer that
we have to-
question.
we have
I'm
one more,
looking
but then
for
we have
the
to go to
for the question.
The question was, can you clarify what you mean by creating a larger pool?
Sure. Can I just do that out loud or?
Yeah.
So I was referring to the right now in the current draft of the NOFO, there's 2.25 million allocated to what are categorized as job creation projects, and a much smaller amount, 750,000, for what are designated community enhancement projects. And in the description, you know, a lot of the job creation projects include, you know, like some of the tech manufacturing, and there was also, you know, mention of healthcare, childcare, education, construction. Although keeping in mind that this is all pre-development work, and then the community enhancement category includes kind of some of the areas of, I'm looking for it, but it includes things like housing. That's the big one that I remember. But it's a smaller pot of funds for some of kind of the larger quality of life types of projects that, oh, well, actually, the area that I work in also, community land trusts and like alternative community land stewardship is also in that smaller category.
Got it.
So my suggestion was, would we be open to making those two pots a little bit of similar size?
Got it. Thank you for that clarification, Luis. Feel free to add to the chat in that response. Ana and Cesar, I really do apologize. I'm going to encourage you all to drop your questions in the chat, and I'll have you know, Jesse and Maria take a look at those. But we do need to move into the next agenda item, and we're up against the clock here. So I need to turn it over to Dr. Walrod and his research team to walk us through give us an overview of the activation plan, which is due to the state on January 31st. So it's got some urgency. And just as a quick reminder, you all decided to make tourism and outdoor recreation the focus of the first activation plan. So this was informed also by a survey that you all filled out that was circulated by Maria in December. And so the survey helped gather some additional data. But I want to turn it over to Dr. Walrod because we are cutting it short here with the time.
Thank you, Ish. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here. I think this actually, I'm glad we included this slide in the deck because this is a good follow-up to the end of the last conversation and just kind of grounds us in where we sit. So the state is putting together their blueprint, and that should be released in early March. And I think we might ask them to come to the March 28th meeting to describe it a little bit more. So just to ground us, as Ish said, it was the collaborative that prioritized tourism and outdoor recreation. That sits, so the state has really divided all the clusters and realized these are from all over the state, the 13 different regions, into strengthen, accelerate, bet, and anchor. And you can see tourism and outdoor recreation sits there in the strengthen category, and we'll talk about what these categories mean in the next slide. But I just wanted to point out that we do have a couple in the accelerate bucket, and those would be semiconductors and med tech. So it's good to know that we have a good representation. And then when the state does release its blueprint, we will have a visual of all the different regions and which regions prioritized each sector that's listed on here. And so I think we were talking in the preceding comments a little bit about those that are down in the anchor part of this slide. especially, you know, childcare, healthcare, housing, infrastructure, and education. So next slide, please. So what does strengthen, accelerate, bet, and anchor mean? So from the state's sort of categorization, in the strengthen bucket, California already has an established competitive position and or significant employment, but leveling growth or wages. Obviously, tourism is in that classification. And it is true that Orange County has a significant competitive position in that area. And it is one of the biggest, if not the largest, employers in the county. In terms of accelerate, where semiconductors and medtech were, so those are moderate to high projected growth. So those are very ready for, you know, dollars to help those sectors expand in the state. And then bet are things where there's innovation has occurred, and there's probably some intellectual property and or high strategic importance. And so then you see the last category, which is the foundational one, are these things like housing and childcare, and those are key to attracting and retaining those industries and those employment opportunities in Orange County and the state. So the state has told us there is a very high chance that the implementation RFP will only apply to those sectors that are in the accelerate and bet classifications. So just something to keep in mind as we finalize the tourism and outdoor recreation activation plan, and then as we move to doing the other one. So probably a good time to segue to the next slide, which is, this is a project management tool. Some regions have already onboarded their sector investment coordinators. We have not, but that will happen very soon. So we want to leave a little bit room for the sector investment coordinator or coordinators who will be in charge of the tourism and outdoor recreation. These are due to the state next Friday. And on various Zooms and calls with the state, other than perhaps the LA County region, these really do have to be up to the state, at least in draft form, by next Friday. The state will then review those. I'm sure they'll provide us feedback, as they did with Regional Plan Part 1 and 2. The remainder, there's not supposed to be more than 5, so we would have 4 more to do after we submit this one to the state on January 31st. And those are due June 30th of this year. And then, you know, obviously they can be updated based on changed circumstances. You know, I'm sure LA was fairly far along with theirs, and then the fires hit, and that might have changed their thinking on their activation plan. So I did want to just say the work that we've done here. As you said, we have some of the team on the Zoom today. So Matt Phillips, who was intimately involved and worked for the state on what was originally SURF. A big part of the activation plan. Matt had so he's working with Orange County now, and Matt developed some content. Dr. CJ Bishop is on the Zoom as well. He did a great job of filling out parts of the activation plan. We also had Ben Palmer, who is on today. And so the team tried to incorporate as best we could the regional plans Part 1 and 2, the outreach effort especially, and Dr. Bishop kind of co-led that effort. So he was very familiar with the community voice there. As Ish said, Jesse and Maria sent out a survey to the collaborative. So we incorporated as much of that input as we could. We did reach out to the destination marketing organizations, the DMOs, like Visit Santa Ana, Visit Costa Mesa. Interestingly, there is Visit California is currently finalizing a regional a series of regional plans. And those are also supposed to be out in March. So we do think that maybe one of the changed circumstances for this plan would be to incorporate the work that the state and the regions have done on tourism. So we want to be open to that. We did also have a review by the Brookings Institution, who is really one of the drivers at the state level in terms of activation plans. And that slide that you saw a couple slides ago, they confirmed that we're on the right track. They had a few suggestions, mostly about pruning and refining what's in the plan that was sent out. So we're in the process of incorporating that feedback from Brookings and the state. And I think with that, we only have a very limited amount of time today, but if the feedback would be most valuable by email and in writing, and we'll try our best to incorporate that in the draft that gets sent up to the state next Friday. But just like with the other documents, it is a living document. And so the absolute deadline would be 5 o'clock next Tuesday, but anything you can get us before that would be very helpful. So with that, I think any comments or feedback from anybody?
Yeah, we've got a couple minutes for some comments or questions. Thank you, Jesse, for answering some of those in the chat, but any additional comments or questions on this item? Go ahead, Tony.
If somebody that hasn't spoken wants to make their comments first, I'm more than happy to step back. Okay.
Not seeing any, so go ahead, Tony.
Okay. I think that there's like I said, a couple categories. I think that there is too many activities relative to this industry when we may have like 4 more, and even if we don't do 4 more activation plans, we still have kind of the overall role of the sector investment coordinator and how we might want to deploy them. So I'm concerned that there are
that was
too
part of
many.
the feedback from Brookings, just
Yeah.
not to interrupt. So as I said, we're pruning and refining it. So you're right on.
That sounds
what
perfect.
Brookings told me.
And so the other piece is that the shift, and this is happening all over. I don't think the sector investment coordinator or even the convener could possibly do all of these things, even with a larger budget. I think how we've looked at what the sector investment coordinator is they're not like the trainer, they're the person that facilitates of identifying a trainer, bringing together partners, maybe helping to problem solve, helping to identify resources. But the key responsible party, there's a whole column for that, is actually in many cases a different entity. So for instance, in the small business area, there's a lot of very strong small business organizations that are out there. So you're like filling gaps. I think there's a lot of strong organizations on workforce training. Some of what's in the proposals are actually projects. And so a task can't be a project. The tasks are supposed to be kind of specific activities that lead to something. And so I realize that you're refining it, but that really starts to fight.
Sure,
and so
if
as
you
I
could
said,
submit that stuff in writing, Tony, that would be very helpful. And the way we thought about this, to be honest, if you're familiar with Orange County, is yes, we wanted to outline activities that could just be done under Catalyst, but realize we have philanthropy at the table, and we also have some major investment that's referred to in the activation plan. Basically $7 billion in investment between OC Vibe and Disneyland Forward. And so there are parts of this that could be picked up by them as well. So we wanted to accurately reflect the level of activity, which is arguably one of the most major sectors in Orange County. But anything you could submit to us in writing, we'll consider. So thank you.
so like if the first task was create a project implementation to bring in other partners, because I think that's what I felt was missing.
Great.
that
Give us
part
that
about
feedback.
go find somebody.
Sure.
Okay.
Give us that feedback in writing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. And just as a reminder, Dr. Walrod and the team have a deadline of the 31st of this month to get that submitted. So your comments, suggestions are strongly encouraged as soon as possible for that purpose. And before we depart here today, we are up against time. I just wanted to offer another important reminder from our earlier discussion regarding the NOFO. So Maria will be sending out a communication to you all with some next steps as preparation for the NOFO release occurs. Please reach out to either her or Jesse with any questions you may have regarding that. And there's a lot of activity in the chat that it's being accounted for by the team. So thank you to those of you who are adding that into the chat. The last call for the NOFO review feedback from this group will be Tuesday, January 28th by 5 p.m. So next week, next Tuesday, if you can get your suggestions and comments in by 5 p.m., that would be greatly helpful and appreciated. Please make those comments and suggestions available to both Maria and Jesse. With that, I just want to thank you all for the participation today. As a reminder, the next collaborative meeting is scheduled for March. Maria, help me out here. The exact date, I'm blanking on it off the top of my head.
The next meeting is Friday, March 28th at 9 a.m.
So we'll see you then, March 28th, 9 a.m. Have a good rest of your day and a great weekend. Thank you all.